What if the confusion you felt growing up, the walking on eggshells, the questioning of your own feelings was never because there was something wrong with you? What if instead you were doing the best you could in a relationship that didn't always feel safe or steady? Hi, I'm Jenny.
And I'm Christine, and this is Big Little Lessons, where the lessons we learn early in life continue to shape us in big ways. After more than 50 combined years as kindergarten teachers, Jenny and I have worked side by side in the classroom.
And today we're talking about emotionally immature parents, healing, and what it looks like to find your voice. We are so glad to welcome Torie Wiksell. Torie is a licensed marriage and family therapist and boundaries coach who specializes in supporting adult children of emotionally immature, narcissistic parents, including those impacted by borderline personality disorder.
She's also the host of the podcast, You're Not Crazy, which I think is a brilliant title to a podcast, where she explores toxic family dynamics, healing, and boundary setting in a way that is both insightful and deeply relatable.
Her work is shaped not only by her professional training, but also by her own lived experience growing up with a mother who had an unmanaged personality disorder, giving her deep understanding of these complex relationships.
Through her work, she helps people feel less alone, more understood, and empowered to create healthier patterns.
Torie, we are so happy you're here with us today.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, we love to start at the very beginning by asking you, what is your earliest school memory?
It's so funny. My earliest school memory is actually lining up to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember preparing for kindergarten, and my neighbor would take me on walks around our neighborhood, and she and I would practice together. And I remember getting there, and we would line up, and I went to school, and kind of at the time it was a smallish city, and we had these trailers and they were blue, and I remember on the asphalt and everything. But that is like the memory that stands out to me because I worked so hard to learn how to say that, and I was so proud the day I actually got to go and do the thing.
Good job. That's great. We always love hearing people's earliest school memories. That's a great one. Thank you for sharing.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you to the work that you do? Because it's so fascinating and it's so specifically focused.
It is. I always say it's a very specific niche. It is very, very specific. I've been a therapist for about 13 plus years now, and I started my career working in an inpatient mental health hospital. And I spent a lot of my career prior to when I opened my practice in 2018, working with clients with serious mental health crises, issues, severe depression, suicidality. I worked with clients with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. I did a lot of crisis response, and throughout that process, I had some training and experience in education working with clients with borderline personality disorder. And so that was actually an area I was really drawn to, and I really enjoyed the work. And when I transitioned into opening my private practice in 2018, I continued working with clients with BPD. So really very specific population, and there are more therapists these days, thankfully, that do work with clients with BPD. But historically, it's been a hard diagnosis to get support for as well. And over the first few years in private practice, I had therapist colleagues and friends who would have a client they were working with, and it would come up that they had a parent or partner with a lot of BPD traits or even narcissistic traits. And because so many therapists don't have training and education and experience treating any personality disorders or assessing for them, it's such a specific subset of the mental health population. They felt really out of their element, and they were like, I'm not sure this is going on, but it really feels like it might be. And I don't know how to help this client. And so I actually started getting a lot of referrals for clients that had family members, had partners with BPD or narcissistic personality traits. And I found that I loved working with those clients. And there was a big demand in this small niche for a therapist that really understood the complexities and the layers. And so I just found myself working more and more with these clients and decided, you know what? That's going to be my practice moving forward because I enjoy it.
So when you were in school as a marriage and family therapist student, did they spend much time in borderline personality disorder itself?
So you learn about differential diagnosis. How do you tell the difference? How do you decide what's going on, right? The complexities with information. But there isn't typically a lot of training that you get outside of your practicum site. So it really depends on where you do your practicum and your internship. And I happened to do mine in places where I had exposure to patients and clients with personality disorders, personality disorder traits. I had education and training from supervisors who had a background and experience in it. And so I have much more of a unique, I think, background than a lot of therapists do, and just happen to get experience in this subspecialty.
I love it.
I just think it's so interesting because on your podcast and on your Instagram, you talk a lot about your own story, right? And how that shaped you. And also, I'm assuming it also shapes the way you support others. You can't sort of separate that, right? It's a big part of who you are and what you bring to the table.
Definitely. I grew up with a mom who I believe had narcissistic personality disorder with a lot of BPD traits. And for a long time, I actually thought she had borderline personality disorder because she had so many BPD traits. And it was actually through talking more about my experiences and my thought process as a therapist around that on my podcast that I really started to bring some of that back to my own personal therapist. And we started having some conversations that I think there might have been more narcissism happening here than I initially thought. But long story short, I think that a part of the reason that I really enjoyed working with clients with BPD so much was that I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of clients who were invested in doing the work to treat their disorder and heal. And that was something I so desperately wish my mom really did. She was someone who went to therapy for a long time, but she wasn't going to therapy and self-reflecting and gaining skills to be a healthy person. And I so valued the work that I got to do with clients who were struggling with this really hard mental health disorder and who were truly invested in doing that work.
Did she ever get an official diagnosis, your mother?
It's a great question. My mom passed away when I was 23 from breast cancer, so about 15 years ago. And she had told me many different things. I know that she had said she was diagnosed with depression and anxiety and OCD. She definitely had a lot of hoarding behaviors. I call her a secret hoarder, where you walk into our house, everything would look nice, but you open up the garage, you open up any closet, drawers, and just like piles and piles and stacks of things. So I can only hypothesize and guess, but there was a lot of stuff going on.
Okay. And I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Oh, goodness. Can you just explain the difference between PPD and narcissism?
So BPD is a disorder that is really characterized by really intense and volatile mood swings. So people will have something that triggers a really intense emotion, and their expression of anger will be very extreme. People with BPD are often talked about in the context of, I hate you, don't leave me, or putting someone on a pedestal and knocking them off of their pedestal, or people having to walk on eggshells around them. Those are all really common phrases and ways of describing what it feels like to have a relationship with someone with BPD. And it really is, a lot of therapists, at least at this point in time, believe a lot of these are trauma wounds. They go back to childhood trauma, right? Really intense. Same with most personality disorders in general, even narcissism. A lot of it goes back to really intense trauma. And with BPD, a lot of it is attachment and fear of abandonment. With BPD, another aspect and symptom of BPD that can be really scary for children who have a parent with unmanaged BPD. And I say unmanaged because it can be managed in therapy. There is suicidality, there are self-harm attempts, gestures that are frequently made as a part of this disorder. And that can be understandably terrifying when you're the child or even adult child of a parent who's struggling with something like this.
Mm. And then narcissism is a branch of borderline personality disorder.
No, separate.
Oh gosh. Okay. That's totally different.
A lot of times though, I'll see in my practice and throughout the years, and like I said with my own mom, there can be an overlap. It's not uncommon to see traits of both or features of both. With narcissism, a huge thing that differentiates it from BPD is a lack of empathy. People who are narcissists, true narcissists, not just people who have some narcissistic traits, but people who are true narcissists lack empathy. They not only don't care how their actions impact you, but they will willfully use information that they have about you to manipulate and harm you if it serves them. And so it's a very different thing. With BPD, a lot of it is, I want to love you. I do love you, but I get so triggered and I lack the skill set to navigate these emotions, which that sounds very lovely and sad and all of these things, but it can be very scary to be around. Really, really, really scary. But with narcissism, it is much more, I am better than you. I am better than these other people. The rules don't apply to me. I am entitled to these things. That is much more aligned with a narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah,
they're really hard and they're really complex. And
yes.
I mean, as you're talking, we're thinking, who do we know?
I know, I'm like filling in the blanks.
But I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, treating narcissism is incredibly challenging. It sounds like BPD is probably easier to treat, because it also sounds a lot like bipolar. It could be similar to those things, but narcissism is so complicated. They're both complicated.
So we don't treat narcissistic personality disorder, and I'll explain that in a minute. BPD is very hard to treat. It really is. It takes a lot of time and effort and willingness to do the work. And what I always say is BPD is incredibly hard to treat. It is wonderful when someone with BPD is willing to do that work. And all mental health struggles are hard. It is hard in its unique way. And it's hard for everyone who's experienced trauma to go to therapy and do the work. With narcissism, the interesting thing is on social media, there has been a uptick of people who will go on TikTok or Instagram and say, I'm a diagnosed narcissist in recovery. I'm going to therapy. I'm doing all these things. But in reality, we don't treat narcissism. We do. People with narcissistic personality disorder end up in therapy, but it's usually for an external reason. Mm-hmm. They're in couples therapy because their spouse threatens to divorce them. There's an external pressure. You have to go to therapy to do something, or they're going to therapy to paint a picture of the person that they're trying to send into the world. People with true narcissistic personality disorder don't believe anything's wrong with them. They believe they're better than you. They're better than me. There's nothing wrong with them. They're smarter than everyone. So there's no work to do there, right? That's why we can't treat someone really with a narcissistic personality disorder, is because by definition, they don't believe there's anything to be treated.
That's interesting, because the people that I've come across that I would say maybe they have some level of narcissism. I always feel like they think of themselves as a victim. They just don't take responsibility for their actions. They don't see that they've done anything wrong.
Mhm. People often refer to like the martyr and the victim mentality, right? They're
Yeah.
either the savior or they're the victim, but never the actual offender in anything.
Fascinating.
Those Instagram posts are so ironic and hilarious because it's not like someone walks into your office and says, please help me, I'm a narcissist.
I know. I know. Never, never, no.
Never happened. So you've started this podcast, You're Not Crazy. What inspired you to do this great work?
So I had been getting people reaching out to me for therapy outside of the states I'm licensed in. And I felt horrible saying, there's not really much I can do. I can't work with you, or my practice was full and I'm beyond capacity. And so I had been trying over the last several years to figure out a way to brainstorm to be able to get more education, validation, just support to adults who have parents with these traits. And one of the things that on a whim, I'm such a planner. So this is just so atypical for me. But on a whim, I was like, well, I'm just going to talk into a microphone and start a podcast. I planned nothing. I was like, You're Not Crazy is what I'm going to call it because that fits. That feels very spot on for this. And then I'm just going to talk, and I'm going to talk about my own personal story and my perspective as a therapist and some of my own reflections and experiences and all of that. And that's what I did. I just came on and I started recording myself talking, and I talked about the reality of growing up with a parent like this and all of the things that I not only have personally experienced, but I commonly see show up with the clients that I work with as well. And it's hilarious because it's the one thing that I didn't overthink in my professional career. And it was the one thing that people really found and they started resonating with. And it's just been this incredibly special podcast and community that has grown. And it just makes my heart so happy to get people reaching out and messages saying, I just found your podcast and I've never felt so seen. Like those are the words that just make me feel like, oh, I'm so glad I randomly decided to start talking into a microphone one day.
Oh, well, it takes a lot of courage, and your work is so meaningful and important. And Christine and I've talked about as teachers, working with so many different families. We're just thinking about these young children as they're growing up. It's such a good learning opportunity for us as well to understand, have compassion that they are out there. It's a real thing. And so we're so appreciative. Let's look at the big picture here of your work. And let's talk about the words emotionally immature adults. Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So this is a very hot topic right now. And it's interesting because emotionally immature, I think of as an umbrella term. There are maturity, emotional maturity, it's on a spectrum, right? It's not like we just have people who are emotionally mature and they are healthy, and then we have people who are emotionally immature. It is a spectrum. And when we're looking at emotional immaturity, we're really looking at people who lack skills that are required of being a healthy adult. So people who are emotionally immature typically are not very familiar with their own emotions. They're not really familiar with when they're feeling upset or triggered. They typically lack healthy skills for conflict resolution, and they might resort to what we think of more childish behaviors like making fun of people, passive aggressive behaviors, those types of things. They really struggle to engage emotionally and interpersonally in an age appropriate way. But a lot of people are emotionally immature. Not everyone under that umbrella has BPD or narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay. Okay. And then would you say it's been this way for a long time, or has there been an increase or decrease in these emotionally immature adults?
I think this is all anecdotal and just my own personal opinion, right? And I'm not pointing to any research on this whatsoever. I think that societally we are progressing. This is an evolution. I think that we're learning more. I think each generation coming in, there are more and more people who are seeking out the knowledge and resources that it takes to be emotionally healthy. So I think part of it is as a society, as we grow and evolve, that this is something that we're expanding our knowledge base in, we're expanding the importance that we put on it. So I don't think it's anything new. And I always get triggered when people refer to the boomers as like the toxic generation. I'm like, please, I've worked with plenty of cycle breaker boomers. They're not, let's stop giving them a bad mouth. Okay.
Sounds good.
So how would you say, these emotionally immature adults, like on the spectrum of narcissism and borderline personality patterns, like how do those things show up in families? I've also heard of parentification. Is that a thing? Can you talk about that? Because I'm not really clear on that.
Yeah. So
Parentification. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's what happens when a child takes on adult responsibilities growing up. And sometimes those can be literal adult responsibilities like cooking, taking care of household chores. But a lot of the times they're carrying the emotional load and weight of managing the personalities in the family and the parents. And when you have emotionally immature parents who aren't making reasonable or rational or thoughtful decisions about what their children need to be successful, not just food, shelter wise, but loving and safety wise, and making sure to attune to them and check in with them and model for them how to be a healthy adult. What often happens is that some of the children, or at least one of the children within the family, start taking on those adult roles, and they start anticipating what the family needs to be successful, and they start trying to manage and co-regulate the adult's emotions. And so it's really a situation that doesn't always look so traumatic on the outside, but is actually quite traumatic because it requires this young child who has a child's brain that's not fully developed to try to manage the family's life in a way that allows them to feel safe.
Oh, it's a huge burden on these young people. What are some signs someone may have grown up in this kind of environment? I'm sure it varies, but what are some bullet points?
So the most interesting thing is a lot of these families hide in plain sight. Like you, both of you, my mom was a kindergarten teacher. She was teacher of the year. So she was my Girl Scout troop leader.
No.
All the things. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of these families hide in plain sight, and it's not always the families that are so obvious. I know. Blow your mind.
You just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, just the way you described your house, the way you'd come in, everything was in its place. And now she's a kindergarten teacher and Girl Scout leader.
I had such a different image of who she was, like a Joan Crawford image of your mom, like, smoking a cigarette and like, yelling at you. I don't know. And then you just blew our minds.
Yeah, which was kind of the reality that she grew up in, was very chaotic and traumatic in different ways. And I think that that's the really tricky thing. When you grow up in a family like this, it's not always obvious. And we do a lot of self-doubt when we grow up in families like this. We think, I call it self-gaslighting. We go back to these memories and we think, was it really that bad, right? Maybe I'm being dramatic. These other people had a positive experience with my parent. I have some good memories with my parent. And what I say to people, to answer your question, is that people who grow up in emotionally healthy-ish families, because there's no perfect family, but an emotionally healthy-ish family, they typically don't have these feelings where they vacillate back and forth between, I feel like my upbringing was very traumatic. I'm afraid of my parents sometimes. I have these really unsettling and unnerving, thoughts. I get very stressed out and overwhelmed thinking about engaging with my family. Those aren't typically things that people who grow up in families that, are just imperfect, but overall healthy-ish. Those aren't typically struggles that they find themselves in, cycles that they find themselves stuck in over and over again.
Okay. So if you're feeling, you have these just kind of extreme emotions around your family.
I think as an adult, our families are supposed to take up less of our mental space, right? We grow up, we have our own independent lives, our careers, everything. But when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, that's not necessarily true. Your family takes up so much of your internal world, and for a variety of reasons. And that can look like a bunch of different things. One thing I always tell people is if you're wondering if you have a family like this, I encourage you to read Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. I think that's a great screener book. If you relate to that relationship, there's something going on in your family.
Is that a book that just came out?
It came out a few years ago.
Oh, it did? Okay. I've seen that
great
title.
book.
It is. Okay. So you recommend it? Great. We'll put that in the show notes. Interesting.
So let's talk about, there's a lot going on, a lot of chaos, a lot of feelings. And then fast forward to these little people who are growing up. How does this kind of upbringing shape a child's sense of self, like as they grow and as they mature? I mean, it sounds really rough.
Yes, it makes it really hard to know yourself and to trust yourself. And that's something that takes a lot of work and effort consciously as an adult to get back into touch with. Adults who grow up in these types of families often say, I can't trust my gut because I don't even know what my gut's telling me. And a lot of the times that's not entirely true, but they've overridden what they actually think and feel so much because they've been so preoccupied with scanning the room, anticipating catastrophe, keying into what is their parent feeling, what's going to set their parent off, how do they regulate their parent. All of those things matter so much more in families like this than what they're actually thinking and feeling. And so that gets pushed to the side.
So they've developed like these incredible coping skills and strategies to help themselves.
It's not a world you can go back and forth between. As a kid, in order to key in and tune into being hypervigilant and sensing because what your parent says to you isn't always what they mean. And a lot of the times it's not, right? It's like you're constantly having to read between the lines and like attune to their body language and noticing this subtle shift in the way that their voice changes and all of these other things. And so the way you do that is by keying way further into what it is that they think, feel, and want, because that's what's going to keep you safe or unsafe. And what you think and want and feel oftentimes could get in the way of that, and it could actually make things, it could bring up conflict, right? It could make you unsafe. And so it's not only about keying into your parent, but it's about ignoring what's actually going on with you. And so you start to have this reality where you're starting to identify as this person that your parents decided that you are instead of this person that you are. And that feels very disconnected. And so there's an awareness there, but it still feels like there's confusion and there's this emptiness and I don't know what I want or need or think or feel.
Wow. Well, what patterns do you commonly see in the adults you work with?
So a lot of them are very high achieving, very, very driven. A lot of them are wonderful people who think they are the worst people on the planet Earth. It is so hard because there's so much shame involved in these types of families, period. There's a lot of fear of people finding out that you're this bad person, that fear and secrecy because your family doesn't want people to find out this is what's going on, right? The reality of the situation. There's a ton of fear and shame and pressure to be different, especially when you know how afraid you were growing up in this family and you don't want to replicate that. There's so much pressure to not repeat the patterns that you grew up in. But that only tells you what you don't want to do. It doesn't actually give you a roadmap to getting where you do want to do. And so what ends up happening a lot of the times is people who grow up in these families, they develop a really high tolerance for being mistreated, a really high tolerance for tolerating abuse, and they don't want to be this angry person, right? This scary person. And so their threshold is so high, but because they're human, they hit a wall, and they hit that wall and they yell or they act out or they say or do something that's mean and doesn't align with the person they want to be, that version of themselves, their value system. And then they have so much shame because there's this fear, I'm just like my parent, right? Mm-hmm. What if I am just like that? I'm doomed to repeat it. And so a lot of the clients that I work with, that's what they're coming in with is, on paper, they're functioning, they're doing well objectively, right? But there's so much stress and worry and tension and fear going on under the surface.
So when they arrive to you, are they able to recognize and name their experience, or are they just talking about like all the struggles that they're having? Like it seems like what you said about the fear and the shame, I imagine that's what makes it so hard. But are they able to, do they meet you there at the beginning, or sometimes do you have to peel off all the layers to get there?
So sometimes because my practice is now so focused, they do meet me there. And a lot of the clients that I work with now in therapy, they've done therapy before, right? They know how to identify their emotions. They've built in some regulation. They've done a lot of that. I call it like the foundational work, right? That we do so that we can even go there or start to go there. So yes and no. Sometimes people come in fresh and this is their first time in therapy and we are starting from wherever we're starting from. And sometimes they've done that foundational work and they know that these things are going on, but they feel at a loss for how to navigate them by themselves.
Mm. We both love your title of your podcast, You're Not Crazy. What does that title mean to you personally?
So this is something that is so meaningful to me because growing up in this type of family, you are made to believe that you are the problem, that it is you. When you point out the unhealthy dynamics in your family, you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, you've got the problems, and you start to doubt your sense of reality. You start to question, maybe I am. If everyone in my family, I am dramatic sometimes, I'm sensitive sometimes, maybe it is me. This goes into the gaslighting element too, right? Well, that never happened or that didn't happen like you said it did. You feel crazy. And so if I can communicate anything to the people who listen to this podcast, it's that you're not crazy. And I'm going to tell you exactly why you're not crazy. I'm not just saying that because you should believe me. I'm going to walk you through exactly why I know you're not crazy.
So that's great because they'll show up and be like, was it really that bad? Right? And then your job is to say, yes, it was really that bad, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody who came in and asked you that question? Like, I tolerated it. I'm a good person. I'm okay. Like, really, was it that bad?
So hopefully, after a few sessions, hopefully I built some rapport. I am very much who I am. If you listen to my podcast, that is my personality. If you listen to this podcast, this is my personality. I am someone who is very direct and straightforward, and I try to incorporate some humor, but I will just say, yeah, it was that bad. Like, I know. Okay. So what do we do about that? Here we go, right? And sometimes it's just needing another human to say, yeah, this is not normal. Like, not everyone experiences this. This is not normal.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's everybody's life journey is that self-awareness, listening to your inner voice. So I'd imagine if you've had someone doing the gaslighting and telling you how you're supposed to be feeling and how you're trying to figure out how to react, it takes a lot of unlayering.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some cycle breaking and healing boundaries and hope. Let's move into how we can fix this problem. So what would you say, Torie, that a healthy boundary actually looks like in these relationships?
So what I always tell people about boundaries is that it is like an evolving thing. So when we set a boundary, we are gathering data. We set a boundary and then we observe and then we enforce the boundary. We always have to enforce our boundaries, especially when you grow up in this type of family. This is like the number one mistake people make is they work up all the courage to set a boundary. And then there's pushback because of course there is in a dysfunctional family almost 100% of the time. And then they're like, I'm a bad person. This feels horrible. I feel so guilty. And they just let it go. And that is what we don't want to do when we're setting a boundary, because that just teaches your family that if they push back on things hard enough that you'll back down and things can go back to how they've always been, which is so much easier for them to deal with than to have to change their behavior. I think with boundaries, what healthy boundaries look like with these types of families is really dependent on the individual situation. But when we're setting boundaries, we're really thinking about ourselves and our own capacity and our own resources are, what are my time, energy, financial resources? What am I setting this boundary on? And it's never about, you need to do this differently. It's about me, right? If you have a parent who's really inappropriate, as an example I go back to time and time again, because it's a really clear and concrete and easy one. If you have a parent who's constantly calling you, demanding that you call them right back, they're blowing up your phone, sending you 20 text messages in a row, your boundary can easily be, if you reach out to me, I'm not going to respond for a couple of days. I need a couple of days to process. Your boundary could be, I'm not answering my phone or checking my messages. I'm putting on do not disturb after 7 o'clock. And so if you call me, I'm not going to see it. I'm not going to respond to it until the next day. This is what you can expect from me. And I have a plan for enforcing it. If you continue to blow up my phone, I'm not going to just back down and give you a call right back and sit on the phone with you for an hour being your therapist. I'm not going to respond to that message.
What would you do if your online store converted 36% more shoppers? You could take 36% more vacation.
Another pina colada?
Yes, please.
Open a new retail location with 36% more square feet.
Fantastic.
Hire 36% more help.
You're hired and you're hired.
Shopify has the world's best converting checkout, up to 36% better than other e-commerce platforms. What you do with those extra sales is up to you. Switch to Shopify today at shopify.com/listen and get a $1 trial. Shopify.com/listen.
I think that boundaries go back to us wanting to save a relationship with someone. We are currently having issues maintaining the status quo of this relationship. And so I think that we set a boundary because we care about this person and because we care about this relationship. And so if you go in with that mindset and you ask yourself, what has to change so that I can maintain that relationship? That's where you start. Okay. And you always start with one thing. Never go in and do like 18 at once. That's not going to go well. Don't do that.
I know. That's always, you want to like rehaul the whole thing, but one thing at a time. Okay.
One thing at a time. And you're gathering data, right? You're learning, if I set this boundary and I enforce it, which I'm probably going to have to do a couple of times, is my parent, is my family member going to adjust? Are they going to respect that? And if not, what is the new boundary that I need to set? What do I do with that, right? We're making informed decisions based on the person that's showing up in this relationship.
Well, I feel like without therapy and without support, it would be so challenging to be able to establish that without feeling all sorts of feelings like guilt and
Yes.
worry and concern. So how do people move forward? Like, how do you take the guilt and or get rid of the guilt?
So it's tricky. So this is my unappealing answer, but honest answer there is one thing we have to do is we have to look at what is the difference between healthy guilt and manipulative guilt. When we grow up in these types of families, they often use guilt tripping to motivate us, right? And the analogy I like to give is that that is demanding your compliance without your consent, right? They don't care if you're consenting to this. They just want you to do it. And if we reframe that in the context of another interaction, like sexual consent, we can clearly see how inappropriate that is. But we have a hard time a lot of the times in our families making that correlation. But that's really what it is. And so healthy guilt tells us, I've done something that is in violation of my personal value system. And it's like an alarm going off saying, we need to reflect and figure out what happened here so that we can learn and grow because this doesn't feel good to me. But manipulative guilt is just used to motivate you to comply. And there's a huge difference. Now, this is the like unappealing part of this equation is when you grow up in these types of families, you're experiencing chronic trauma. You're always in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Your nervous system is just like firing on all cylinders. And when you're in constant survival mode and trauma response, your brain thinks that you need to constantly act whenever you're being triggered, right? Your brain thinks like, this is scary. This is dangerous. I need to do something to be safe. And that's how it feels all the time, whether it's true or not. Anytime your body experiences a distressing emotion, when you're growing up in this type of family, your brain thinks you're in danger. We need to act and do something to make us safe. And so that could be dissociating, mentally checking out, just going on a mental vacation. I can't handle what's happening right now, so I'm not going to like process and pay attention. It could be going into problem solving mode like so many people do. Your parent is in chaos. They have a problem. I'm going to jump in and take ownership of your problem and fix it for you. It can look like so many different ways or so many different things. But what we don't learn growing up in these types of families is how to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. And guilt is one when we're working on setting boundaries, when we're working on healing. It's a really tricky one because it makes us feel like our worst fear, going back to what I said at the beginning, right? That shame and that what if I'm a bad person? Like, I don't want to be a bad person. Does this make me a bad person? Some of the most impactful work that I do in therapy clients and some of the most impactful work I've done with my own therapist has been just sitting in a session talking about how horribly uncomfortable I was actively feeling in my body or my clients are actively feeling in their bodies, having to feel this really uncomfortable emotion in the moment and not doing anything to get rid of it, knowing that it's going to go away. I'm not going to feel this way forever, but it is so hard and so scary to just sit in that.
Yeah. You want to feel better, but it's almost like a grief that you have to go through. Okay.
Yep.
So what does healing look like realistically?
I think that healing is complicated. It's layered. For those of us that are cycle breakers, we're the one, right? Like we're the one that is shifting the way that our family lineage is going. Behind us, there's trauma and abuse and all of that. And we are shifting the road that our family is now walking down. And I think healing looks like a couple of things. It looks like developing self-compassion for our imperfectness and for the fact that we're going to have behaviors that we don't love and that we don't feel proud of all the time. And to have compassion and appreciation for the parts of us that continue to show up, even though we're imperfect, and continue to try. And I think it also really involves developing and learning the skills that we need to be a healthy adult, because we didn't see those growing up. So it involves learning how to recognize what emotions we're actually feeling, how to move through those emotions effectively without numbing out, without disconnecting, without problem solving, but actually being with ourselves and our emotions. It involves learning how to get into touch with who we are as people. Like, what's my value system versus what I was told should be important to me growing up. It involves learning how to address conflict in healthy ways. And that doesn't mean being the most agreeable, wonderful person ever and being, that person that everyone likes, because that's not real. I just was fortunate enough to listen to Dr. Becky speak last week. I was at a conference she was speaking at, and she says that in her family, they say perfect is creepy. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to steal that. That's the greatest thing I've ever heard, because it's so true, right? Yeah. It's about being imperfect and still showing up and learning and allowing people to see us and to love us.
Yeah. Very good.
Wow. So how do these early experiences show up in adult relationships or parenting? Like, if you're not a cycle breaker, I'm thinking about friendships and all different kinds of relationships. What does it look like?
It's hard. It's a struggle. I think really knowing what we don't want to repeat does not give us tools to do something differently. And it can be really frustrating and confusing. And oftentimes we go really into a black and white thinking in our relationships when we grow up in these types of families, because these parents are very black and white in their thought process. People are good or bad. There's a right or wrong way to do things. And in relationships, it's oftentimes much more nuanced and complicated than that. And so if you have a friend who disappointed you, what do you do with that in a healthy adult relationship? Because people are good or bad. So how do you make sense of the fact that you care about this person, but they let you down? Same with like a romantic partner, your romantic partner is a jerk one day. What do you do with that? Does that mean they're a horrible person? Are they dangerous? How do you make sense of that? I think it's really confusing, and it can feel really draining and exhausting to try to navigate these relationships. It can feel really confusing and draining, and it can be really isolating in so many ways. And in parenting, I think we get a lot of people coming from these family dynamics that don't want to repeat the harm, but lack the skills to do something differently. And they find themselves doing that, bottling up, trying to be perfect and then losing it, and then beating themselves up, and trying to be perfect and losing it and beating themselves up, and promising themselves, I'm never going to do that again. Whenever I hear someone say, I promised myself I'm never going to lose out on my kids again, I'm like, no, don't do that. You need more skills. It's not about willpower. It's going to happen again if you try to will it. So it's these cycles that are well-intended, but just result in us feeling awful.
Yeah. And I mean, just the fact that someone's been aware of it is the first recognition. But is it possible to change these patterns? I mean, how and where do people begin?
There's a form of therapy called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. It's like the gold standard for treating borderline personality disorder, but it's also very good for a lot of different things. And they have skills training in DBT where they teach mindfulness and emotional identification and emotional regulation, distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness, all of these skills that we need to learn to be a healthy adult. And so I think going through DBT skills training is a great idea. I think there are aspects of this that you can learn through reading. Dr. Becky's book, Good Inside, is great if you're a parent. It talks about shame, and it is a wonderful book. Brene Brown has a bunch of great stuff. There's Dr. Kristen Neff, who's on self-compassion, is great. These are really great resources that you can go through. Over the past year, I ran a membership community for adults who have parents with BPD and narcissistic personality disorder. And I put a bunch of the resources, the educational resources that I created, into a self-guided online course too, where I go through a lot of that stuff there. There is not only one place that you can get this information, but I think it's about learning what and how these things look like and how to incorporate them into your daily life.
That sounds great. I want to make sure we put these in the show notes because there's so many good resources.
Yeah. So, Torie, what gives you hope in this work?
Cycle breakers give me hope because we as a people have every reason to be pessimistic and just give up on life and the world and people and everything. And yet there's this innate belief inside of us that we're not going to stop at anything except healing. Like, we're going to break this cycle. Like, we're going to figure it out. And it's so incredibly inspiring to me that all of these humans exist throughout the world that have never met each other, but they all have experienced this trauma, and they have every reason to believe that things cannot get better, but they believe in their core that they can figure this out and that they can learn and they can heal and they can grow and they can have healthy relationships, and they show up and they do the work, and it's messy and we do it wrong and we are complicated and we're imperfect. And yet that inspires me. It just makes me feel like there's hope for all of us that are willing to try.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Let's shift into the speed round now.
Why not?
You ready, Torie? We ask you a question.
I'm ready.
So are you a morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
Very good.
Coffee, tea, or something else entirely?
Lots of coffee.
Okay, how many cups?
I'm in the toddler phase, so too many. I stopped counting. Let's not place another judgment on me today.
That's okay. No, I'm asking because we just talked with the doctor and she says 1 to 2 cups, but my mugs are huge. So it's like, yeah, I have 2 cups a day, but they're kind of like, it's probably 4 or 5 cups. Mm-hmm. A small thing that always makes you smile.
My daughter, she's just the cutest.
Oh, and she's a toddler, correct?
Uh-huh. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a busy mom.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you're in it. What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day? You probably don't get a chance to, but you could.
Yeah, definitely don't get a chance to as often as would be appreciated, but walking is my favorite thing. I love to go for a walk. That's like my favorite.
Perfect. A phrase or reminder that you come back to in your own life.
I am capable. I think that is something that I have had to learn and remind myself when life feels really hard. I'm capable of adapting. I'm capable of tolerating this moment. I am capable.
I love that. You are capable.
Thank you.
In more ways than one. Yes.
Very much so. And what is something that brings you peace right now?
I think just having built a life where I have relationships that are so wonderful and lovely with people who know me for my imperfections and all, and I can just show up authentically and mess up, and I know that they'll still love me and root for me, and I just so value that life.
It's really nice.
Well, we always like to share what we've been learning from you and our big little lessons as teachers. What we've taught and what we've learned is there's always something that we glean. And I've been writing notes through the whole time and I want to go back. But what really sticks out to me right now is the hope that you presented, the hope of You're not crazy. These things are true. Be honest with yourself and how you're feeling, and that you can get help, that you can rewrite your new journey and get past some of the things, the traumas that have happened. But, it's going to be work, but it'll be good work. It'll be ones that will help empower you as you move forward. So thank you for that. There's so many good lessons. Christine, how about you?
I mean, we all need therapy, let's face it.
Yes, we do.
It's such a positive thing for everyone. But I love what you said about setting boundaries, because boundaries can be hard. And I like that the way that you framed it, we set boundaries because we care. And I thought that was really, to me, that resonated so much because I've struggled in my life with boundaries. So I've taken that information from you as a therapist. So thank you so much for that, because it's to maintain the relationship that we're in. We're not trying to destroy it. We're doing it because we care. So that really meant a lot to me. I loved that.
Torie, is there anything that you wanted to share?
I think my biggest hope that people will take away from listening to this interview is just that none of us are doing this perfectly. There is no perfect cycle breaker, and that's what it is to be a cycle breaker. There's not anyone out there. I know there's a lot of gurus online and people who pretend like they have it all figured out, but they don't. There's just those of us that are doing the work and are trying, and we stumble and we fail and we try again, and anyone is capable of doing that. That's willing to do that too.
Beautiful.
So
well,
good.
Torie, thank you so much for being here and doing your work. Christine, do you want to talk about the reflection homework?
Sure. So if this week you notice a moment where you feel triggered or reactive, like rather than judging your feeling, just pause and think about it and reflect. Where might this be coming from? Just take a minute. We all are moving so quickly. So sometimes we behave in a way that we don't always feel proud of, but there's always a reason for it. So ask yourself why.
Great.
Be a cycle breaker.
Be a cycle breaker. Excellent. All right. Well, you can find Torie on Instagram and TikTok at Cycle Breaker Therapist, and on her podcast, You're Not Crazy. We'll link everything in our show notes.
And also, if you're enjoying Big Little Lessons, we'd love for you to follow along. You could find us on Instagram at Teach Big Little Lessons, or reach out to us at teachbiglittlelessons@gmail.com.
We don't have all the answers, but we do have a lot of experience.
And as always, Big Little Lessons are everywhere. Until next time.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.